So I'm super excited to be with you here this morning, and you are going to share and know a lot more about me and my personal stories throughout the talk. Let's make sure. There we go. So I'm going to start off talking about my family. So this is my dad. This is circa 1976. That's my littlest brother, Lance. This guy is Dwayne, also my younger brother. That's me. And that's my older sister, Birta. And when we were growing up, our dad would regale us with tales of what it was like to be an officer in the Army. He was Corps Commander of his military high school. He was Corps Commander at his university. He was one of 2 officers in the Philippines selected to be sent to Australia for their officer training camp. And so for me growing up, my vision and understanding of power was very much rooted in you get in a position of authority that you earn and then you command and you control. He went on to become a lawyer, where you're commanding a courtroom and you're really trying to make and shape the outcome. So that very much was my understanding of power and what you do to attain it. And being a very powerful, strong-willed person, he of course had very strong opinions on what movies we should watch as a family. And does anyone recognize this screenshot? Maybe a handful of you. This is from a classic film called 12 Angry Men. And for those of you who are unfamiliar with it, it's about a jury of 12 men, because back then there were only men on juries. And they all need to decide whether or not this young man accused of murder is guilty. And the judge tells them, you cannot vote guilty unless you are certain beyond a shadow of a doubt. And this guy here, Henry Fonda, the guy almost in the back, he's not sure that the guy is innocent, but he is sure that he doesn't have any doubt, there is no shadow, there are shadows of doubt for him. And so he proceeds, but everyone else is like, oh, he's so guilty, it's so obvious. So he proceeds in the course of the film to convince everyone towards his point of view. And they're like, you know what, I guess I do have doubts. I can't vote guilty. And it's a powerful film, and when I watched it as a kid growing up, I thought, wow, Henry Fonda is so persuasive. That was cool, and maybe someday I'll be able to be that persuasive, and I'll definitely always vote not guilty. And that was what I took away as a child. Now fast forward 10 years, and I'm in Professor Pfeffer's class. And I read the syllabus, and I'm like, oh, 12 Angry Men, I know this movie. And I thought it'd be like just fun to watch it with my classmates. But what he did when he brought it to the classroom was he would show a scene, and then he would stop and pause. And he would point out, do you see how Henry Fonda is taking a cough drop from that guy? That is how he's building an alliance. And he proceeded to unpack, scene by scene, every alliance that Henry Fonda built in this room that let him ultimately have enough power to persuade them both to listen to him and also to move toward his point of view. It was very calculated, and it was done with great skill. And when I suddenly saw that version of the movie, it was like a veil was lifted for me, and I realized power is something that all of us can have within us. And it's something that we create with how we behave in any particular situation. So it became something that I just really tried to tune into as I went through my career after that. And speaking of power, this is Colin Powell. Some of you might know him. He was led the NSA, 4-star general, chairman of the Joint Chiefs, but he was like another Army guy. And my little brother Lance, the first guy I talked to you about, so he never remembered my birthday. And sometime in the mid-90s, Colin Powell came out with an autobiography, and this package shows up in my house. And it's his book, his autobiography. And I was like, wow, I am really not that interested in reading about a general, but since it's the only time Lance has ever remembered my birthday, I better read this book. So I read it, and what impressed me was not his incredible accomplishments. What impressed me was how thoughtfully he went through his life. So when he went to Vietnam, he was a young commander, he lost half his troops within his first week, and he was devastated. And there was this one moment at night where he's just like, I don't know how I can go on. And he slept on it, and he woke up the next morning, and he said everything felt a lot better. And that became one of my primary rules of life, which is sleep on it. It will all look better in the morning. And I was very struck by how he pulled these lessons from these pivotal moments in his life. And so that is what I'm going to try and do for you today, which is 5 lessons I learned on my path to power. And I'll tell you each of the stories as I navigate through my path. So when I graduated from school, I went to work at Microsoft. And at that time, it was the best company in the United States to work for. And they had a really smart recruiting strategy. They'd go to all the best schools. They would transplant a whole cohort up to Seattle where nobody knew anyone except each other. We would work our tails off. They would give us free drinks. They gave us free long-distance phone calls, so we would just stay at the office all the time. But it worked really well in making sure we were working really hard and trying to do good work. And so I did that. I worked really hard. I did really good work. And by the time I was 25, they handed me over a $60 million business to manage as the decision maker. They're like, you're the product manager. You make the decisions. And I was like, this is crazy, but wow. So that was Word for the Mac. And that eventually graduated, you guys all know and use probably Microsoft Office. That became the predecessor for that suite, Microsoft Office, and it was always like the big deal to move from an individual product up to Office because it was the golden child. So I was asked to move to the Office team. I had a new boss and I was like, okay, I've been here a few years. I've been doing a good job. And so I checked in with him because they had an annual review cycle where you would get your promotions and your bonus. So I was like, I must be up for a promotion for sure. And so I check in with him saying like, so Dennis, am I on track? And he'd be like, yes, definitely on track. And I was like, great. 2 months before the review, I checked back in. I said, am I on track? And he's like, definitely, great. So I was really excited when I went in for my annual review. And he says, you've done incredible work, you're respected by your peers, here's your compensation, here's your bonus, but nothing about my promotion. And so he gave me what he thought would be really good news. And he saw the look on my face and he's like, you seem surprised. And I'm like, there's no promotion? And he's like, no, were you expecting one? And I was like, yeah, I kind of was. I kept checking in with you, kept saying, yeah, I'm on track. I thought that was for the promotion. And then he said, this is probably a good time for me to give you some important feedback that also came up in your review, which is you need to be a little more politically aware of the broader situation around you. And I was like, well, what do you mean? I don't want to be political. I just want to do a good job and have that be enough. And he's like, that's exactly the point. There is a bigger perspective, and you just have to be more aware of it in how you do your job. And it was I hated hearing that feedback, walked out of there really disappointed, but it was a super important lesson to understand the bigger game. Whether or not you are playing it, it is being played around you. Call it three-dimensional chess, whatever metaphor works for you, but there is always a bigger game being played. And you don't need to be a power player in it. You simply need to be aware so that you can calibrate your actions within that broader context. So I took that lesson to heart when I went to my next place of work, which was Netscape. And this was in the early days of the internet. It was totally crazy, barely organized chaos. And I went there, and they were trying to go through this important decision process where they'd have Netscape Navigator, the browser, #1 browser, but they were adding on all these productivity apps to it. And so they looked at that and said, well, do we just call it Navigator Plus or More Navigator, or do we actually call it by a different name? And because I'd just come from Microsoft, where we'd gone through this transition of single successful products and moving to a suite, and I'd seen the powerful market opportunity that represented if it's done well, I had some unique knowledge. But I didn't know anybody at the company to be able to share this with. So I thought, okay, what would the powerful thing to do be? And the founder of Netscape was Mark Andreessen, and he was close to my age. And I was like, we're close in age, I'll just write Mark. And so I wrote Mark Andreessen saying like, hey, I just thought I would share this information. I had no idea if he'd read it or write me back. He wrote me back in a couple of hours saying, I'd like to talk with you. We had breakfast. He said, I learned a lot. I'd love to continue these conversations. And I realized I had unique knowledge that provided tremendous value to the new company that I was working at. And what was really important was that I chose to share it so that it could be known. Fast forward a couple of months, and my boss's boss basically taps me on the shoulder, cold, no prep, and says, hey, would you mind coming with me to an executive staff meeting so we can talk about and make this decision? And I was like, sure. So I'd done no preparation. I had never met the most powerful men in the company. And these guys, literally everyone thought they walked on water. So I walk into this room, and one by one, they start taking their chairs, and they try to make me feel comfortable, but I'm like, you're Peter Curry? And our CEO was just a legend at the time, Jim Barksdale. And I was like, oh my God, there's Jim Barksdale. And then my boss's boss goes, okay, Martina, can you tell us what your thoughts and views on this matter? I just proceeded to tell them my perspective, and I wasn't arguing that it should be a particular way. I just wanted them to have the knowledge with which to make this decision. And they wound up going with the new product name for the new product suite. And so that was a very important lesson in being bold with your unique perspective. In this particular case, I had some really valuable knowledge that came from one company that was of value to another. But it doesn't matter what you're doing. You have a unique perspective that you can bring to anything you do. You might be the only person of color in a group that's largely homogenous. You might be the only woman in a largely male group. You might be the only person who's intersectional and can represent that point of view. It is really, really important to not look at that and say, I don't have the same perspective as all these people, so I shouldn't say anything. It should be the inverse. It's because I have a unique perspective, because I bring something new to this conversation, that I should bring it. So always be bold with whatever your unique perspective is. Now that includes, by the way, introverts who are quiet. If you can't do it in the meeting, do it via email and send it all the way up to the top. It's important for your voice to be heard. So when Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz left Netscape, there were a group of us that went with them to start a company called LoudCloud. And this is before clouds were what they were today, which is everyone knows and understands what they mean in the world of computing. And so we go into these companies and we would talk about our services, and they just had no point of reference for like, what, cloud? I don't understand, internet, blah. And Mark basically would like to talk about it like a utility that you just plug in and turn on, and people weren't connecting with it. So we went out around the country and did a series of focus groups to try and understand what would people connect with. And it turns out the types of people we were trying to sell to connected much more with something called managed services, because it was something that they were like, okay, I have a mental map for that. So I go into this presentation where we're presenting all the results of our research to Mark, and I say, based on the research, here's what we'd recommend, managed services. And he says, okay, I don't like it. What else you got? And I said, that's it, because when we look at the research, this seems to be the really best option for people understanding what we do. And he said, I heard that. I don't like it. What else you got? And so I went to the CEO, Ben, and I said, Ben, isn't it my job to do the best thing from a marketing perspective and make sure we as a company make the smartest marketing choices? I was running marketing at the time. And Ben said, yes, technically that is your job. However, this is Mark's company. And if Mark is not behind it, it's not going to happen. So yes, we want you to always make the right recommendations and make sure we're doing the best thing from a marketing perspective, but Mark has to support it too. It took me a little bit too long to really metabolize what that meant, and I spent a little too much energy trying to be right versus doing the right thing. And eventually Mark asked me to step down as head of marketing, and it was an extremely painful way to learn the very important lesson that sometimes the more powerful thing to do is to know when to back down. We always think, no, I must stand up, I must be strong, I must have my voice heard. Sometimes that is not the right thing. So knowing when to play this and knowing when to back down, that is super ninja power skills. It does not make you less powerful, it actually makes you more powerful. So know when to back down. Do we recognize these women? So obviously Hillary and Michelle. But just a quick show of hands, how many of you feel like Hillary is the more powerful person between the two of them? Anyone? The whole rest of the room, you guys are choosing Michelle. Why do you think Michelle is powerful? Positionally, she's only been First Lady. She resonates with people. There's this wonderful quote from Michelle where, and of course, she's legend. She'll dance with Ellen, she'll carpool karaoke with, and do whatever with Jimmy Fallon. She's totally okay and she's good with it. I heard an interview with her too. She also talked about like her marriage. She's like, our marriage is like one of the most public examples of a good marriage, and so I needed to be public that we actually worked on it, and we saw a relationship counselor because great marriages still require work. So yeah, she's highly aware and willing to be very, very public with the work that she does. So this quote of hers was, I know the very first thing I need to do is to make people laugh, and after I've made them laugh, then I can tell them what I want them to hear. So she follows a very important, the fourth rule, which is to put people ahead of everything else. You must connect with people. And that is an enormous part of what gives you power. And it's easy to look at that and say, oh, she just has this great personality. It's because she puts the people first and that connection first that makes us experience her personality that way. People that know Hillary Clinton very well thinks she walks on water. She's amazing. There's nothing that she's probably as personable to those that know her well as Michelle, but we don't get to feel or experience that, and that's a lot of why we perceive her so differently. But this was something that I had to do for the next 10 years after I left Lauchengco. I was working with Silicon Valley Product Group, and it's a group where we go into companies where we drop in cold, and our job is to advise them on how to get better at product management or product marketing. And so we can only advise. We do not have any operational authority. We have no formal responsibility in these companies, and yet we are expected to be agents of change. And we realized that the most important way to do that was to make sure we were having connections with people first. Because if we had those connections, if they were willing to connect with you as a person, then they were willing to hear all the other recommendations. Without fail, anytime I didn't do this, where I just took the job and I did it and I shared the policies and the recommendations, it never stuck as well. Whereas the flip side was, if I connected with them as people, one engagement always led to another, and it went from just a pure teaching engagement to where I'd actually become a formal advisor for years. This also can apply to how you make job choices. I often get asked, are you B2B, are you B2C? And I was like, I'm people, and if I like the people and I like the product, we can figure everything else out. Because by the way, products change, markets change, but people are people, and you want to have the people around you energizing and not soul-sucking. And that is a very good way to provide guidance to how you make choices. It is not career suicide, or it's not having a plan. It's knowing that that is what will help make you very successful. And speaking of people, that's how I got to my current chapter as an operating partner at Costa Nova Ventures. If you had asked me back when I started my career, hey, do you want to be in venture capital? I would have said like, oh, a bunch of rich, highfalutin white guys that think they're all that. No, thank you. I would run the other way. But Greg Sands, who's the founding partner of Costa Nova Ventures, he and I worked together at Netscape 20 years ago. And we would check in every year or two and just say like, hey, how you doing? What's up? And every single time we found those conversations massively energizing. Like we'd literally be high, going like, that was such a great conversation. We should do this more often. And eventually, after many, many years of this, he said, you know, life is too short for this energy, this connection, to not be something that we take advantage of. We should work together again. I'm like, great, you know, I've got all this other stuff going. If you can figure something else out where I'm not venture capital, then yes. And so he created this role of operating partner so I could do what I've been doing, advising companies and actually helping them get better faster, and do it within the context of his portfolio. And so I accidentally found myself in venture capital. And it is all the things that people talk about. I won't pretend to paint it in this bright, shiny light. It is insular, it is a boys' club. And I realized as I was in this and coming into it and seeing it for what it was, I was like, gosh, you know, how do I find a home for myself when I'm not an investor, but I am still part of this venture capital milieu? And we were in the middle of interviewing someone for our talent operating partner position. She was a recruiter at Oracle, and she recruited executives in the product and engineering space. And I said, oh, wow, that is a really tough space to get qualified women candidates. What do you do? And she said, yeah, it's a big problem. And she stopped there. And I just had this thunderbolt moment going like, since when in Silicon Valley do we just say there's a problem and do nothing? So I immediately went to the rest of the team, of course they're all guys, and I said, hey guys, I really think that we need to try and do something to raise the conversation and elevate action around having more women have more seats at more tables. Because it's the only way we're going to get more women in those higher positions is to have every rank filled with more women. And they said, you're right. Let's do it. And so we started this event called Seat at the Table. We've had 3. The very first one sold out in less than 24 hours. And like this event, we kept having to move it to larger spaces. And it's become a way in which I've met amazing people like Cindy and being able to have conversations that let me transcend just my role as operating partner. I get to actually help the venture community drive a conversation that's very important to our industry. And it helped me find and craft and create a space for myself within venture where I felt I will have made this place better for having been here by making this contribution. And so that is my last lesson, which is to be authentic in what you choose to do. I was authentic in saying like, I want to work for Greg. I don't know where it's going to lead, but I'm going to trust and have faith that it will be a positive experience. And then I also was authentic to myself, which is I feel deeply passionate about women in tech and that we need to do more to progress everyone along the entire spectrum, not just more women in venture. We need to do it across the board. And it was something that helped create conversations that we never would have had. And it's also helping make sure that the conversation stays in the venture community where these people are anointing companies and they can actually really have influence on whether or not you have a diverse board and that they have diverse slates for every positioning they're hiring for. So it actually can create a tremendous amount of change by making sure the conversation is there. So that was my personal path through power. And just like Cindy said, everyone is individual and different, and so your path will be as unique as you are as a person. So you want to forge your own path to power. What is most important is that you do it. We all know people we grew up with, we were in college with, colleagues, who we look at them and we say, you know, they're 10 times more talented than I am. Or that person who was your valedictorian in high school, you're like, what happened to them? They just kind of had an okay, normal career, but we all thought that person was a superstar. Why didn't the world? And it's because those people haven't fully occupied their full power in their world. It's not that they need to be in positions of power. It's that they haven't been powerful in whatever their individual contexts were. It is important that all of us do that. So sobering fact, the Women in the Workplace study that gets put out every year, this is the 3rd or 4th year, I think, that they were doing it, that everything has flatlined. There's increased awareness on the importance of having more women at more levels of management at every single level. And men actually think it's improving, and women actually think it's improving. However, the data does not say that is so. At every level of management, and especially for women of color, the numbers are flat or down over the last 2 years, which is incredible if you think about certainly where our awareness is. So it is incumbent on all of us to make sure we are fully occupying our power so we can create that change. So wherever you are and whatever you are doing, forge your path to power. And I'll leave you with this parting thought, is you have to find your power before anyone will give you any. So take the time, make the investment. You will have incredible teachers today and incredible lessons that will help you access whatever it is that you need to feel that way in whatever environment you're going to. So I wish you luck and helping you find your power.